Welcome to 16th century Italian art. My name is Sebastian Benkowski, and I'm the instructor of this course. Welcome to week 1. Here's what we want to accomplish in week 1. The 3 video lectures are going to address 3 things. First, this lecture will give you a general sense of what this period was about, what these artists were interested in, what they were working on, what was important to them. The second lecture I call Looking at Paintings. And what that is going to give you is a whole list of questions and issues that you can think about and discuss when standing in front of a painting. And the third lecture is going to do the same when you're standing in front of a sculpture. There are 3 handouts, one for each of the lectures. Please make sure to download those from Blackboard and, if possible, print them out. You will find that they're very useful to refer to, not just this week, but throughout the whole semester. And then either on Thursday or Friday at 7 p.m., we're going to have our live online discussion section. A reminder that you choose one of those 2 times. It's going to be the same thing each time. So you only need to attend one of the live online discussion sections each week. Okay. Before we get started with the main topic of the lecture, I want to just briefly review chronology and geography. Just say a few words about them. Just to kind of place the 16th century and place Italy in our minds. So here is a very, very rough chronology. The Roman Empire falls in 476 CE, thus putting an end to antiquity. And a period starts that is called the Middle Ages, that continues for the next 1,000 years. Afterwards, we have a period of 2 centuries, which we call the Renaissance, the 1400s and the 1500s. Okay. So this semester, we are studying the 16th century or the 1500s. Okay. So we are studying the second half of this period, which we usually refer to as the Renaissance. The reason that we differentiate this period is because, for a whole variety of reasons, this was an incredibly fertile and talented and incredible period in Western culture, focusing in on the various cities and countries on the Italian peninsula. There was this flowering of creativity, and the number of incredible artists and incredible artworks is just astonishing. That's why we divided into 2 sections, right? And so this semester we will only focus on the second part of it, from 1500 to about 1600. And then, in case you're wondering what came after, we call that period that spans about 1600 to 1750, we call that period the Baroque. Now, to be even more precise about the period that we call the Renaissance, we differentiate sort of 3 sub-periods there. We call the culture of the 1400s the early Renaissance. Then the first 3 decades of the 1500s we usually refer to as the High Renaissance. And then from the 1530s to about 1600, we call that time period Mannerism. Okay? So in our course this semester, we will spend the first half of the semester talking about the High Renaissance, and after the midterm, we will talk about Mannerism. Okay. Geography. Today, when you think of the Italian peninsula, you think of a single unified country, which we call Italy. However, during the period of the Renaissance, the Italian peninsula was a patchwork of independent countries. Some of them were republics, which means that they were ruled by elected officials, but most of them were principalities, where a single person held power, and usually power shifted from generation to generation, passed from father to son within a single family. Okay, the two most important republics at this time were the Republic of Venice in the upper right-hand corner in the north, and the Republic of Florence, which is light blue and kind of in the middle of the peninsula. But even there, we will see a shift from a republic to a duchy, to a principality, because the very powerful Medici family will take over power and will declare themselves dukes of Florence and will rule the city for most of the 1600s. Some other important principalities. We have the Duchy of Milan, which is indicated in green here on this map. And then we have this country called the Papal States, which is indicated in purple here. And this whole area was ruled by the Pope out of Rome. Now, today, when we think of the Pope, he's a spiritual leader, right? However, in the Renaissance, the popes were both spiritual leaders, but also political leaders, right? They ruled this area in the middle of Italy, which we call the Papal States. And you will notice that the whole south part of Italy, including Sicily, was a country called the Kingdom of Naples. And during most of the Renaissance period, it was actually under the control of the Spanish monarchy. So it was like a colony of Spain. How interesting and how very different from the current political situation on the Italian peninsula, right? So that is something important to keep in mind. Okay, now to move to the main topic that I want to address, the main interests of Italian Renaissance artists. What were these artists interested in? What was their focal point? What were their main interests that created this very fertile, creative period, which we call the Renaissance? Okay, let's go down the list. And if you haven't yet downloaded this handout, please do so. Please pause the video right here, download it, and then rejoin me. Okay, so now you should have the handout right next to you. So let's take a look at what made the Renaissance such an amazing period. First, there was an overwhelming focus on Christianity, and that's why about 90% of the works that we're going to see have some sort of a religious Christian theme. They either illustrate stories from the Old Testament, stories from the New Testament, stories from the lives of the saints, or their portraits of powerful church figures like popes and bishops and monks and nuns, or they speak of Christian spirituality and mysticism. However, there is also a huge interest in antiquity among Renaissance artists, and this creates kind of the central tension of the period. This desire to try to harmonize Christianity and antiquity. Now, when I speak of antiquity, I'm talking about two specific cultures, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. And just following the handout there, what was left over? What did the Renaissance artists find of antiquity? There were texts, There were books, poems, there was literature that was left over from antiquity. There were fragments of sculpture. There were fragments of architecture. There were gigantic ruins of these grand structures that were built during the Roman Empire. And as you were plowing your fields, it was not uncommon to come across a coin from the ancient Roman Empire. So ancient Rome, the ancient Roman Empire, was sort of everywhere in Italy during the Renaissance times. You were bumping up against it everywhere you went. And especially the gigantic ruins of it were kind of fertile ground for the imaginations of the Renaissance artists. Now, if that was all that there was to the Renaissance, even that would be worth spending a semester studying and trying to understand. However, there was much more. Okay, let's keep going down the list. Italian Renaissance artists were also interested in understanding and representing individuals. What makes each person unique? This could mean studying and trying to depict facial expressions, creating a sense of personality, trying to express and suggest an inner life, trying to express mystical experiences, both in terms of facial expressions and also in terms of the poses of figures. What else? Renaissance artists were hugely interested in the natural world. They were the first ones who started to look directly at nature and copy exactly what they saw. And they ended up with detailed depictions of natural elements, plants and animals and landscapes, and also human bodies, human faces, expressions, feelings, emotions, all drawn from nature. Also, there was an interest in creating idealized versions of reality, right? Not just what they saw in front of them, but versions that were kind of more perfect than anything that exists on our physical plane. These artists were also interested in the deep structures of the world, in proportions, in how one thing relates to another, in how the small parts of the world relate to the giant cosmic order. And we use the terms macrocosm and microcosm to talk about that. They were fascinated with how things relate, how different layers of reality relate, how the physical realm relates to the divine realm, to the spiritual realm, and how in the world to depict that using paint or using marble or using wood to make a sculpture. How to infuse those ideas into stone or into paint on canvas. And we will see the fascinating ways in which they end up doing that. They were also very interested in creating the illusion of depth on a flat surface. And here we're talking about painting. They were fascinated with various techniques, and they developed some completely new techniques for creating illusions of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. But wait, there's more. They were also interested in creating levels of symbolism and meaning. So whenever you're looking at Renaissance painting or sculpture, first, yes, you can identify all the elements and what they are, but then we always need to ask ourselves, yes, but this element, this little thing, what does it stand for? What does it symbolize? Does it have a deeper meaning than just the surface meaning of its identification? Very often that will be the case. There are layers and layers and layers of meaning there. And this is one of the reasons why it's useful to have an art historian around to help point out these meanings and to help point out these levels of meaning. something else. The Renaissance artists were interested in exploring symmetries and balances, asymmetries and imbalances. You will always find them playing around with compositions, creating symmetries and asymmetries. And during the Renaissance time period, there was also an interest in competition and innovation. And this is one reason why there's such a flowering of creativity during this time period, because the artists of the period were always looking over each other's shoulder, always trying to copy each other, always trying to outdo each other. So much so that the standard expectation was that a student would surpass the teacher. They wouldn't just equal the teacher. They were expected, if you were a student, you were expected to, when you were done with your training, to be better than your teacher. There was all of this innovation and creativity and experimentation, and we can also see that in the materials and the techniques of art making itself. And that's the last point on the handout. What we're seeing is this innovation and development of new materials and techniques. Two that I point out here, we'll see the shift from using egg tempera paint to oil paint, and from painting on wooden panels to painting on canvas. And then we will also see the rise of printmaking. So as opposed to a painting or a sculpture where you just have one original, with printmaking, you can make thousands and thousands of copies of an image very easily and very inexpensively. And this created a revolution in image making and image consumption throughout Europe. Okay, but enough of this reading of slides. Let's look at some works of art. And I've selected 3 works of art. And what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to follow the handout with each of these 3 works of art and really see which of these interests these works of art reflect. Okay, here's the first one. It's a Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian by the artist Andrea Mantegna. Okay, now who is this Saint Sebastian person? Okay, quick background. Saint Sebastian was a soldier in the ancient Roman army, and he converted to Christianity. This was a crime. This was a crime punishable by death. So he was put to death, but he was put to death in a very creative way. Because the emperor said, Sebastian, you're a really great archer. We shall put you to death by having you shot through with arrows by your fellow archers. Ooh, oh, that's harsh. That's harsh. So that is what we are seeing here. Saint Sebastian tied to a column and being shot through with arrows. Notice that we don't see his attackers. We don't see his torturers. We don't see his fellow archers who are shooting. We only see him. There is a focus on the individual. Oh, a focus on the individual. Yes. Ah, okay. That's one of the elements of one of the interests of Renaissance artists. Okay, right there. We know that we're looking at a Renaissance masterpiece because there is this focus on the individual experience. But whose experience is this? It's an early Christian saint. All right. Going back to our handout, there is an overwhelming focus and interest on Christianity, on the history of Christianity, here specifically early Christian saints. But is there also an interest in antiquity? My gosh, yes, of course. He's standing in front of this very beautiful ancient Roman column. There are these ancient Roman arches on either side of him, and the ground underneath his feet and off to the side, bits and pieces, fragments of ancient Roman sculpture. Now, of course, this is appropriate because the time period in which he lived was, in fact, under the Roman Empire. However, this fascination not only with ancient elements, but with ancient ruins, with the crumbling of this ancient civilization. Wow, fascinating. Okay, let's go back to the handout. So there's an interest in Christianity. There's a fascination with antiquity. Uh, is there an interest in creating an illusion of depth? Wow, look at that tiled floor behind the figure of Sebastian. My goodness, it's very convenient, isn't it? Because those tiles, the way they're painted, they look like they're receding perfectly in space. They're creating this illusion that there is this space behind the architecture. It's very subtle. All right. Mantegna here is not foregrounding that. Quite literally, he's putting that in the background, but he makes sure that you know that he knows how to create the illusion of depth. He has mastered the technique of one-point linear perspective, which we will discuss a little bit later in more detail. All right. Is there an interest in the natural world? Wow. Yes. Look at the tiny little plants and the landscape and all of these elements of nature kind of finding their way in through the ruins. Okay. An interest in idealized versions of reality. Well, look at the body of this saint. Right? Clearly, Mantegna has brought in a live model on which he bases the body of Saint Sebastian, but then he perfects it. He idealizes it. Right? He makes it the most perfect male body that he can imagine, and he emphasizes the fact that he really understands human anatomy by only putting a little loincloth on Saint Sebastian. Right? The fact that he is almost nude gives Mantegna an opportunity to really show off his understanding and his skill at depicting the human anatomy. Oh, okay. Fascinating. All right. Is he interested in the deeper structures of the world? The relations of different levels of reality, a relationship between the individual and the divine? Well, yes, actually. Take a look at the facial expression of Sebastian. All right, so he's struck through with arrows. He's bleeding, right? And yet the facial expression that Mantegna chooses to give him is this very calm and peaceful expression looking up towards the heavens. There is this fascination with Mantegna and other artists of trying to depict the relationship of the physical realm to the divine realm. And here's a great example, right? A man whose faith is so strong that he is willing to be killed and tortured for it rather than renounce it. And that is so perfectly depicted in the way that face is calm and composed and the eyes look up to heaven. Brilliant. Is there an interest in symmetries and balances and asymmetries? Well, yes, actually. Take a look at that column compared to the body of Saint Sebastian. So the column is very rigid and straight, and the body is kind of flowy a little bit. He's standing not in a rigid pose, but in a pose that we call contrapposto, where the weight of the body is unevenly distributed on the 2 feet. You see that his right knee is bent and his left knee is straight. The weight of his body is shifted a tiny bit. Wow. So even in a depiction of the martyrdom and suffering of an early Christian saint, Mantegna is creating these very elaborate tensions between rigidity and softness, this balance and slight imbalance to the body, a very elaborate pose. And then also take a look at the architecture in back, right? Those arches. On one side of Sebastian, the arch is perfect. On the other, it's broken down. All right, so these symmetrical asymmetries, these imbalanced balances. Clearly, Mantegna must be a Renaissance artist because he's interested in these things. Okay, so that's a great example of a Renaissance artist who really kind of ticks off all the boxes. We could also talk about competition and innovation and the materials that he's using, but that would take a little bit more time and a little bit more explanation. All right, but for now, I hope you're seeing how I'm using the handout. I'm going kind of element by element, issue by issue, and really looking very, very clearly and in a lot of detail, very carefully looking at the work of art, and asking myself the question: is this issue something that I see here? How can I describe it? Which details do I give that suggest that this issue is something that is of interest to the artist? Okay. Notice that I'm pointing to specific details to substantiate my my arguments for the interests that Mantegna has. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm kind of modeling what I'm hoping that you will do in the upcoming looking assignments throughout the semester, in the answers to your questions. Right, whenever you're answering a question, always think, can I point to a specific element that will illustrate my point? Okay. Here's another amazing masterpiece from the late 1400s. The artist is Pietro Perugino, and the subject matter is Christ giving the keys to Saint Peter. Okay, Jesus, Saint Peter. Well, okay, that ticks off the first box, right? There is an interest and a focus on Christianity, and in fact, this is an illustration of a moment in the Gospels where Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, I shall give you the keys to heaven and earth. Whatever you lock up on earth will be locked in heaven. Whatever you unlock on earth will be unlocked in heaven." Now, of course, when Jesus says this, he means it metaphorically, symbolically. What Perugino does here is he paints an actual set of large keys that Jesus, standing in the middle foreground, is giving to Peter, who is in the yellow and blue, who is kneeling in front of him. All right. But imagine if you're the artist and you say, well, okay, there's this passage, there's this metaphorical passage in the gospel, and I want to illustrate it. How do I best illustrate it? Well, I better put in actual keys. Okay, all right, so there's an overwhelming focus on Christianity. Yes, we see an illustration of a moment from the Gospels. Is there an interest in antiquity? Let's see. So the groups of people in the foreground, and then there's this large space. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, clearly Perugino is interested in depicting in creating an illusion of depth on a flat surface. Look at the very spacious town square that he's painting. Right? If you look at the story in the Gospel where this passage occurs, we're not really told where they are, where Jesus and Peter are. And if we look at other depictions of this scene, they sometimes happen in the middle of nowhere, in the wilderness, in a big field. But here, Perugino is choosing to show us a large empty piazza or town square that just happens to be paved with these large square tiles that are perfect to depict the illusion of the recession of space on a flat surface. That's brilliant. Okay, but back to this question of, like, is there an interest in antiquity? Okay, here's our answer. The two structures on the right and the left in the background are very, very similar to a very prominent ancient monument that still exists today. It's called the Arch of Constantine. And what's so important about the Arch of Constantine is that Constantine was the emperor who first converted to Christianity. And he was the emperor who started to convert the whole of the Roman Empire to Christianity. And so obviously he's a very important individual in Christian history, but also he belongs to antiquity. So he's kind of a wonderful bridge. He himself was someone who tried to harmonize ancient culture with Christian culture. However, there's more, because that central structure, the central structure behind Jesus and St. Peter, actually resembles Florence Cathedral, which is a Renaissance building. Wow! So in the same painting, Perugino is making reference to ancient architecture and also to architecture that's contemporary to him. Okay, what else? Perugino is fascinating in juxtaposing idealized figures and portraits of contemporaries. And you will see in this detail, I hope you see how the faces of the figures on the left side, which I've labeled as idealized figures, are a little bit too perfect. And the figures on the far right, they actually do look like people you might come across in the city of Florence even today. These are probably portraits. And the fact that he creates this intermingling of idealized figures and very real portraits of contemporaries, right? Absolutely fascinating. And if we look at our handout, okay, he's interested in symmetries and balances, and he's interested in juxtaposing our level of reality with a more perfect, more spiritual realm. Okay, so in all of those ways, Perugino too kind of ticks off all of the boxes of a Renaissance artist. Here's the third image that I've chosen. This is The Birth of Venus by the artist Botticelli. And here, all right, let's again look at our handout. Let's see, is there a focus on Christianity? Wait a minute. No, not really. Because what we're seeing here is the pagan goddess of love, Venus, who is standing on a large shell. She's being propelled by the wind blown by the two intertwined figures on the left, who kind of blow a warm western wind. And then the figure on the right has been variously identified. She might be the goddess of time, and she is about to throw a cloak over the nude Venus to cover up her nudity. Okay, this has really nothing to do with Christianity. Okay. So in this case, a Renaissance artist who, at least in this painting, does not include any Christian elements. He is fascinated, however, with antiquity, with ancient mythology, with the ancient gods and goddesses. Is he interested in creating an illusion of depth? Well, there's a little bit of an illusion of depth with that with the water there, but I think you have to admit, not very much. The painting is pretty flat, right? And the figures themselves, even the nude figure of Venus, well, she doesn't really look like an actual human woman, right? Her proportions are a little off, right? Her arms and legs are a little bit too long. Her breasts look just a little off, right? Her neck, if you look at it closely, That's a very long neck for that kind of body. And so the proportions are all very, very strange. There is some sense that he's looking at actual human bodies, but that is not one of his interests. Wow, fascinating. And look at the shell that she's riding on. Clearly, he's been to the seashore and he's seen some shells, and that looks a little odd. Right? Everything about this painting seems a little off, a little contrived, a little artificial. Wow, interesting. So I've intentionally chosen this painting to include in this lecture to show you that not all Renaissance artists are equally interested in all of these elements and issues, but sometimes it's actually very important to see what they're not including, what they're not making reference to, and then ask the question, why? Why are they not creating an illusion of depth? What is it about this kind of shallow perspective that might be meaningful? What is it about this story from ancient mythology that might be meaningful to Botticelli and his patron, the person who commissioned this work of art? What is the purpose of such a work of art? What function did it have? What function did it have for Botticelli as the artist? What function did it have for the patron who commissioned this work, who paid for it? These are questions that we're going to explore in one of the lectures next week. And then, of course, we will continue asking all of these questions throughout the semester. So, once again, I hope you've gotten at least a general sense of what the artists of this period were interested in, what their focus was, and the fact that not all the works of art are going to be kind of cookie-cutter representations of this set of interests. And when they're not, that will be important for us, and we will start asking different sorts of questions based on what's included and also based on what's missing in each work of art. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in discussion section later this week. Thank you.